Here we go with the chapter for Childebert the First. Now, this is not Childeric, this is Childebert. Clovis left 4 sons who divided the kingdom into 4 equal parts, and then drew lots for them. Théry, who sprung from a concubine, was king of Metz. Clodomir was king of Lyon, Childebert of Paris, and Clotaire of Soissons. The precise limits of their respective dominions have not been marked by historians, but from circumstances it may be collected that the kingdom of Metz comprehended the country of Albigenses, Rouergue, Auvergne, all the frontiers of Provence and Languedoc, Champagne, and the 3 bishoprics, Luxembourg, Alsace, and the electorates of Trèves, Mayence, and Cologne, and the whole of ancient France, as far as Westphalia. That of Paris extended along the sea-coast from Picardy to the Pyrenean Mountains, Beauce, the Maine, Beauce, that's spelled B-E-A-U-C-E, Maine, Anjou, Touraine, and Berry formed that of Orléans. The kingdom of Soissons was less extensive. It was situated between Champagne and Ile-de-France, Normandy, the ocean, and the Scheldt. But though these 4 states were governed by different princes, independent on each other, they were all subject to the same laws, and formed but one monarchical body. The nobles of the 4 kingdoms assembled together from time to time in the same place. They were settled the general affairs there, where they settled the general affairs of the nation and decided such such lawsuits as concerned the empire, either by the importance of the object of dispute or by the quality of the parties. 519, the first years of the reign of these princes, were neither disturbed by foreign war or domestic commotion. France enjoyed the most profound peace, where Cochiliac, who pretended to be descended from Clodion, made incursions upon the territories of the King of Australia. I'm not going to say Australia, but yes, it is like it. Perhaps the first spelling like in Australia. It's Austrasia. Théry was obliged to send a considerable army against him, the command of which he gave to his son Childebert. This young hero overtook the Danish prince just as he was going to embark his forces, which he attacked and overcame, and slew their leader with his own hand. It appears from the accounts of those times that so early as this period France had a navy, since we are told that the French fleet took that of the Danes, got possession of a considerable booty, and relieved all the French prisoners. So it relieved all the French prisoners as well, or released them, and stole the ships from the Danes. This expedition was succeeded by another into Thuringia, where Balderic was deprived of his dominions and his life. The king of Austrasia was to have divided this conquest with Hermann Stroy, the brother of the deceased monarch, at whose instigation he had taken up arms. Such were the terms of the treaty. But the Thuringian, equally perfidious to his allies, as barbarous to his brother, violated his engagement. Thierry disguised his resentment and deferred his vengeance to a future opportunity. The 3 sons of Clotilde declared war against Sigismund, King of Burgundy, who unjustly detained the possessions of their mother, and after they had overcome him in a pitched battle, they seized his dominions. Sigismund, his wife and children were delivered to Childebert, who, notwithstanding the threats and solicitations of the abbot Avitus, caused them to be massacred and thrown into a well, a punishment that was but too frequent in those barbarous times. Gondemar, brother of the... So they really wanted the things. They're still pirates. Possessions of their mother. Oh my gosh, this is like the family ties situation that never stops. Gondemar, brother to the murdered monarch, re-entered Burgundy and retook the kingdom. When the King of Orleans, assisted by Thierry, advanced against him and defeated his army at Val-Thorens in the neighborhood of Vienne, but his extreme eagerness in pursuing the enemy carrying him too far into the country, he was surprised by a party of Burgundians who attacked and slew him. The courage of the French, far from being damped by the death of Childebert, was now converted into fury. They destroyed all before them, sparing neither age nor sex, and did not leave Burgundy till they had laid the whole country waste. Thus perished the youthful Childebert in the midst of victory. Some years after, his 3 brothers and Childebert, his nephew, revenged his death by the conquest of Burgundy, which they divided between them. Now, if you look on a map, Burgundy is smack dab in the middle of all of the France that they had hold of, so it does make sense that it was time for them to take Burgundy. This monarchy had been founded 120 years at the period of the reunion of the Kingdom of France. The King of Orleans left 3 sons, Childebert, Gontard, and Claudial, brought up under the care and inspection of their virtuous grandmother. They would doubtless have enjoyed that felicity, every essential requisite for which they possessed. But for the cruelty and ambition of their uncles, these princes, having by artifice got their nephews into their power, immediately threw off the mask of affection which they had hitherto worn, and sent a sword and a pair of scissors to Clotilde, the guard of their youth, the guardian of their youth. Now, why are they doing this? That princess, in a transport of grief, inconsiderately exclaimed that she would rather see them committed to the earth than shut up in a convent. Her words were but too faithfully reported to Clotaire, who, seizing the eldest, then only in his 11th year, dashed him to the ground and plunged a poniard into his breast. The youngest, affrighted, threw himself at the feet of Childebert and, embracing his knees, begged hard for his life. The monarch was deeply affected and could not restrain his tears. But Clotaire, reproaching him with his weakness, tore the child from his arms and murdered him on the body of his brother. The third had the good fortune to escape the fury of this barbarian. He submitted to have his hair cut, and having devoted his life to the service of God, is at present invoked under the name of Saint Cloud. Though these events did not take place till some years after the death of Childebert, we thought it necessary to relate them together in order to present a future interruption in the thread of our history. Okay, so it got quite sketchy back there. We had the one begging, and yet tore the child from his arms and murdered him on the body of his brother. So yeah, that got a little gruesome. And so over here we're having the other said, well, I'll just join the church and be a saint. Okay. Now, the one that said that he was going to be saint, well, which one was that? Was not Childebert himself. No, it was Childebert. This is why I'm getting confused. The names are so similar. We have Clotildus, we have Clodalg, and then we have Clotaire. And they're all begging Childebert at some point over something. And usually it's for their life. So this Childebert was quite another brutal. Sorry, I can't get exact on that one. The king of Strasia had not forgotten the placidity of Hermonstraphoi. Assisted by his brother Clotaire, he entered Thuringia, carried the capital by assault, and reduced the kingdom to subjugation. Oh, scheiße. To subjection. Almost every event of these barbarous ages is marked with cruelty. The king of Thuringia, confiding in the promise of Thierry, went to meet him at Tolbiac. But by walking with him one day on the walls of the town, a person in the retinue of the French monarch came behind him and threw him over into the ditch, where he expired. Clotaire married the incomparable Radigonia and ordered her brother to be murdered. But he himself had nearly fallen a victim to the jealousy of Thierry. That prince had desired to have some private conversation with him. When the king of Soissons entered his apartment, he perceived the feet of some soldiers who were concealed behind with the tapestry, upon which he made a sign to the noblemen which attended on his person to follow him. Though his brother was thus foiled in his attempt, he betrayed no signs of confusion, but loaded him with caress and presented him with a rich buffon, a present that was very common in those times. All right, so one of them actually had something, an upmanship there, and was not killed. Gregory of Tours relates that among the precious articles which Childebert sent to Tiberius Constantine, Emperor of the East, there was a gold bason enriched with stones, which weighed 50 pounds. During these transactions in Thuringia, the king of Paris revenged the insults and cruelties committed to his father by her husband Amalric. The effects of these expeditions were the deliverance of Clotilde, the death of the king of the Visigoths, and the capture and pillage of Narbonne, where there were found 72 vases of gold, which it was pretended had been taken from the Temple of Solomon. As Childebert was going on this expedition, a false report was spread that the king of Austrasia was killed, which induced him to take a different road and direct his march to Auvergne, whose inhabitants joyfully acknowledged him for their sovereign. They had soon reason, however, to repent their imprudence, for the victorious Thierry entered their country with troops, took possession of Clermont, stormed the castle of Valois, burnt that of Thiene, reduced the fort of Olliergue, which was deemed impregnable, caused Munderic, the chief supporter of the rebel party, to be assassinated, and left in every quarter marks of the most implacable vengeance. This destruction, it was very much a destructive expedition. The reconciliation of Thierry with his brothers are the last memorable actions of his reign. He died in the year 534. There was nothing of mediocrity in the character of Thierry. As a king, prompt and decisive in all his undertakings, as a man licentious and unrestrained in the gratification of his passions, never did a monarch exercise authority more absolute. Never did a politician pay less respect to the laws of honour and the rights of humanity. We did learn from the history of this reign that formerly the kings of France nominated to vacant bishoprics without having waited for the suffrage of the people and the clergy. The Church of Auvergne, having chosen a successor to Bishop Euphrasia, Thierry, not approving their choice, conferred the bishopric on Apollinaris, who was accordingly received and consecrated. This prelate to dying some months later after his promotion. The king appointed Quintin, who the Arians had expelled from his fee, to succeed him. And here we have the Arians, the first mention of them, Arians. The neighbouring bishops assembling installed him in the church at Clermont and presented him to the people, who acknowledged him for their lawful pastor. The popes had not yet arrogated to themselves the right of confirmation, the only homage paid by the prelates to themselves, the right of sovereign pontiffs, consisted in fending them a confession of faith and asking their communion. Childebert, the son and sole heir of the king of Austrasia, was in Auvergne during his father's illness, a slave to the charms of the beauteous Deuteria. He deemed to have forgotten the rest of the world. Already had Childebert and Clotaire adopted measures for dismembering the succession of Théorie, and were preparing to enforce them, when the young prince, tearing himself from the arms of his mistress, hastened to Metz, and by slewing himself to his subjects, defeated the perfidious schemes of his uncles. But the commencement of a reign, in many respects glorious, was dishonoured by an action of great criminality. The new monarch repudiated his wife, Wissagia, in order to espouse Deuteria, who was also married. These incidents were very common in the early times of the monarchy, for besides Clotaire's marriage with his brother's widow, that prince had 3 wives at the same time, 2 of whom were sisters, and he made no scruple to marry Walladria, his nephew's son's widow. Such examples were followed by private people who probably carried this licentiousness to a greater height. At least, we are authorized to believe so, by one of the canons of the Second Council of Orleans, by which a man is prohibited from marrying his brother-in-law or father's wife. So it looks like some sort of polygamy is going on. The French now discovered a new theatre for the display of their valour beyond the Alps. Theodot, having become king of Italy in right of his wife Amalfonta most likely, had scarcely obtained the crown when he put her to death, to whom he was indebted for it. Justinian undertook to inflict vengeance on the ungrateful assassin, and with this view applied for assistance to the French princes, with whom he speedily concluded a treaty. The Ostrogoths, however, found means to detach them from this new alliance by ceding to them Provence and a part of the Alps. But this appeared... But this second treaty was no better observed than the first. The following year, Theobald appeared in Italy at the head of a powerful army, where he first attacked the Ostrogoths, and next the Romans, and having defeated both their armies, ravaged Liguria, sacked the city of Genoa, and then returned to France, loaded with plunder, which was the only advantage he derived from this inglorious expedition. Okay, so now we actually have a real attack into Italy. Here we are, Childebert, a real Frenchman going in and sacking Genoa, and ravaging Liguria. So now the collection begins, doesn't it? They're building bounty, they're building all kinds of treasures. After his return to his dominions, he entered into a league with Childebert against the king of Soissons. Historians are silent as to the cause of this war. They only tell us that Clotaire, unable from the inferiority of his forces to encounter his enemies in the open field, entrenched himself in the forest of Routaille, on the Pays de Caux. with the resolution to perish rather than yield. Already had the two monarchs made every necessity and necessary preparation for forcing his entrenchments, when a dreaded tempest burst over the camp. The noise of the thunder, incessant flashes of the most vivid lightning, and showers of hail, mixed, according to the credulous historians of those days, with stones, carrying consternation and dismay throughout the ranks. The Confederate princes acknowledged the hand of God, and immediately became reconciled to Clotaire, whose camp, we are told, the storm had respected. This miracle was ascribed to the prayers of Saint Clotilus. This very same year had been fixed as the epoch of the establishment of the kingdom of Evertot. It is said that Clotaire slew with his own hand in the church of Soissons a gentleman of the name Gautier, who was lord of that barony. That when his passion was over, he was the first to condemn the murder he had committed, and as a kind of reparation for it, erected the lordship of Evertot into a kingdom. But this story appears to be fabulous. The lords of Bellay, who had enjoyed that lordship by the marriage of one of their ancestors with Isabelle Chenu, acknowledge that they have no just title to this pretend royalty. So something sketchy there with the kingdom of Evertot. But he was, Clotaire did slew the old Gautier. After the reconciliation between the kings of Paris and Soissons, those monarchs returned their troops and, entering Spain, took Pamplona, ravaged Biscay, Aragon, and Catalonia. So now we're getting into more of Spain, and laid siege to Saragossa, whose inhabitants, in order to recuse themselves from pillage, gave them the tunic of Saint Vincent the Martyr. This precious relic was deposited in the church which Childebert had built in the suburbs of Paris, and to which he had given the name of Saint Croix and Saint Vincent. It is now called Saint-Germain-des-Prés. Such is the account given by the French authors of this event. The Spaniards, on the contrary, affirm that the two kings were totally defeated before that town, that the conquerors have immediately seized the passes of the Pyrenees. They must have been taken if the Visigoths had not been bribed to grant them a passage, and that their army was entirely cut in pieces. So there's some discrepancy here over the border in the Pyrenees. Italy still continued to be a prey to the destructive flames of war. Justinian, convinced that he should fail in his endeavours if he had the French princes for his enemies, sent them a celebrated embassy with a formal cession of all of his rights. He's going to cease all of his rights and pretensions to Provence. So Italy is giving up Provence to these princes. He granted them the privilege of presiding, like the emperors, over the games, which was celebrated in the amphitheatre at Orleans. and he issued an edict ordaining that all gold coined by them and bearing their image should be current throughout the whole extent of the empire. This was a prerogative that had constantly been refused, even to the great king of Persia. But all these advances proved fruitless. Theobald, we'll call him Childebert, entered into a treaty with Totila, to whom he had recently refused to give his daughter in marriage, because he would not suffer her to be the wife of any one of the inferior rank to that monarch. The motive of this confederacy was the assumption by Justinian of the pompous title of Franciphus, which was grossly inconsistent after the numerous victories obtained by the French over the Roman troops. So here we have Justinian giving so much. He's giving Provence away. He's saying you can make coins. And apparently it's becoming fruitless. The king of Austrasia undertook either to make him lose or merit that title. He began by causing medals to be made on which he represented not only with all the marks of the imperial dignity, but with the appellation of Lord and August, which were peculiar to the emperors, Augustus this and Augustus that. He next thought of engaging in his quarrel the Gepidae, the Lombards, and all those nations which swelled the lift of Justinian's conquests. He intended to carry the war even into Thrace and Illyria. But these grand projects were put to an end by a fatal accident, which deprived him of life. This prince, the most accomplished of all the descendants of Clovis, was taken off either by the fall of a tree, which wounded him mortally, or by a tedious disorder which baffled the utmost skill of physicians. For historians are not agreed on this point, so we don't know really how he died. But it was an accident. Bold, hardy, and intrepid, he had scarcely arrived at maturity, and he acquired, by a signal victory over the Danes, the epithet useful, well, we're saying useful, which was ever after annexed to his name. Beneficent, humane, and alive to the miseries of his people, he had nothing of the ferocity in his disposition, which dishonours the memory of his grandfather, his father, and his uncles. Adored by his subjects, courted by his neighbours, and feared by his enemies, never did a monarch more ably maintain the dignity of his crown. Marius, Bishop of Lausanne, always distinguished him by the appellation of the great king of the French. The memorable reply which he had made to Bishop Didier is particularly worthy of notice. That prelate, having brought him a considerable sum, which he had been lent from the royal treasury, to the inhabitants of Verdun, he refused to take it. "We are both of us but too happy," said he, "you in having procured me in opportunity of doing good, and I in not having suffered it to escape." He left but one son, whom he had by Deuteria. He was named Theodebald or Thibault, and succeeded to the crown, without any opposition from his uncles, which sufficiently proves that bastards were not then excluded from succession. The death of the king Austrasia was soon followed by that of virtuous Clotildis, who was a model of patience, piety, and zeal. Her body was conveyed to Paris, where it was interred by the side of Clovis, in the church of St. Peter and St. Paul, now St. Genevieve. She was afterwards canonized. Theobald had scarcely ascended the throne when Justinian sent ambassadors to ask his alliance in the restitution of those places which his father had taken in Liguria and the Venetian territories. The young monarch in return dispatched 4 French noblemen to the court of Constantinople, who brought this negotiation to a happy conclusion. Peace was proclaimed between France and the Empire, and the French remained in possession of their Italian conquests. The Pope was treated with great respect. The Emperor left the affair of the 3 chapters to the decision of a general council. This appellation was bestowed on the famous questions which was agitated by the 6th century, relative to the condemnation of certain, which was writings of Childebert, Bishop of Sieur, a letter of Ibas, Bishop of Edapha, and Person, and works of Theodorus of Mopsuestia. These writings are represented by ancient authors as just objects of suspicion. The 2 first because they were composed in favor of Nestorius against Cyrillus of Alexandria, and the last because they were regarded as sources whence all the errors of Bishop of Byzantium were derived. But Theodoret and Ibas had both been acknowledged as orthodox writers by the Council of Chalcedon, and Theodorus had been received into the bosom of the Church previous to his death. These considerations occasioned no small embarrassment. Nevertheless, the 3 chapters were condemned in the 5th General Council of Constantinople. Pope Vigilius refused to ratify this condemnation, but it was solemnly confirmed by his successor Pelagius. Childebert, considering this step as an infringement on the authority of the Council of Chalcedon, complained of it to the Pope, whom he obliged to send him to his confession of faith. This letter was sufficient to prevent this schism, which was on the point of breaking forth in France, though it was inadequate to remove the prejudices of the nation with regard to the provocation of which it accused the sovereign pontiff. That was a bit wordy. The peace with the empire was of short duration. The King of Austrasia, in violation with the late treaty, permitted Leutharius and Bucellinus to lead 75,000 men to the assistance of the Ostrogoths. These generals made themselves masters of Farma, defeated a detachment of the imperial army under the command of Fulcaris, spread devastation around them wherever they went, and advanced as far as Samnium, where they divided their army into 2 bodies. One of these, under Leutharius, after ravaging Calabria and the neighbouring countries, perished by the plague under the walls of Padua. The other, commanded by Bucellinus, laid waste Lucania and the country of Brutai, and was then cut to pieces not far from Capua. The slaughter, we are told, in this battle was so dreadful that by 5 soldiers, all but 5 soldiers, escaped out of the army of 30,000 men. The rest were all slain or taken prisoner. By this defeat, the French lost, they lost all the places they possessed in Liguria and the Venetian territories. The passage of the Alps was the only one of their conquests that they were able to preserve. So here we are getting into the borders, the true borders we're seeing today. And it was these 30,000 men in battle. This calamitous intelligence had fiercely reached France when Theodebald, whose mind was more vigorous than his body, departed this life in the 7th year of his reign. He left no children, though he had 2 sisters. We are now in AD 555. Wisigarda and Ragnatruda. The law of the realm, says Agathas, called Childebert and Clotaire to succeed him as his nearest relations. This is the first historical monument of that fundamental law which excludes females from the throne. The king of Paris, attacked by a violent disorder, was in no condition to enforce his right, and Clotaire, taking advantage of this circumstance, gained over the nobles of Austrasia and compelled his brother to make a formal surrender of all his pretensions. Childebert, by way of revenge for this treacherous conduct, sowed confusion and discord in the family of the Soissons. When that monarch returned from an expedition against the Saxons, he found that Crème, the most beloved of all his children, had revolted against him. He took proper measures for reducing him to submission and was on the point of enforcing them when he obliged once more to direct his arms to the Saxons. He therefore sent his 2 other sons, Childebert and Gontran, to attack the rebels. These kings, all the children of France, were there honoured with the title. Entered Auvergne, compelled the enemy to raise the siege of Clermont and advance to give them battle as far as the Limousin. But a half report purporting that their father was killed made them suddenly return towards Burgundy. The return of Clotaire and the death of his brother put an end to these civil commotions. Crème, who, deprived of his uncle's support, implored the king's mercy and was pardoned. Childebert died in the 47th year of his reign. That was a long reign, and his loss was severely felt by every class of people. The nobility lost a chief, the affability of whose manners and the plenitude of whose goodness captivated every heart. The people had to regret an equitable sovereign who governed them with wisdom and moderation, and religion lost a protector of unbounded zeal. A number of monasteries and hospitals built and founded with a magnificence truly royal, a charter published by his authority for the abolition of idols and images consecrated to the devil throughout his dominions, and 4 councils assembled during his reign, and by his order, 1 at Orleans, 1 at Arles, 2 at Paris, are exhibited by historians, and so many illustrious monuments of the piety of this monarch. He was reproached, however, and justly, with the death of his nephews, but if he had ambition enough to protect the crime, he had at least not sufficient cruelty to put it in execution. He was buried in the church of Saint Vincent, and now Saint Germain-des-Prés, where his tomb is still to be seen. So he was not as brutal as his predecessors. The foundation of the Church of Paris is ascribed to him, but that is a mistake. It is true, indeed, that he embellished it with the glass windows, ornaments, till then unknown in the churches. But he certainly did not build it. He left 2 daughters, Childebert and Clodocinda, who were, of course, excluded from the throne. So here we have the first mention of glass windows in 558 in churches. Stained glass, no doubt. All right, thank you. That was the chapter 4, the great, we're at, not Clotet, well, we're going to call him, I'm sorry, I'm so tired, Childebert the First, and his reign, and the losing of Italy.